All right. Let's see the notice yet. There it is. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Definitely see a bunch of new names here, so excited to have some new introductions to go through in a little bit. I'm Jared Brown. I'm going to get us kicked off today, but we're actually going to spend a little bit of time doing introductions in a minute, so I won't spend too much time on that. Um, all right, so let me just switch slides here and quickly talk through the agenda. So as I mentioned, we're going to do some kind of virtual around the room. Would love if ever if anybody's interested to turn on their video, and we'll allow people to say what their name is, what company they're from, or industry they represent, and maybe just another interesting fact. We'll have something on the screen to kind of prompt that, but just give you a little bit of a warning. After we do those intros and a little bit of Pug user group business, we'll kind of switch gears and look at the new monthly feature summary. So Graham's going to be taking us through that. Then our feature presentation today is just all about user experience in Power BI, and Ben Dewey is going to cover that topic. And then we'll wrap up with some of the more recent exciting feature announcements from Microsoft Build and the Business Application Summit. There's certainly a lot, and we can maybe drop the links to some of those announcements in the chat too, so you can explore a little bit more deeply in the ones that we don't cover. But Sam Kelly is going to cover that topic. Very, meant to be a very kind of informal group. When we were able to meet in person, we had a great round table, so everybody was kind of, able to kind of converse, raise hands, barge in, ask questions. So we want to kind of achieve some of the same effect that we had with that in person in this virtual setting. I am, glad that with the virtual, kind of shift, we've kind of opened up, the group and inviting folks from all over. It looks like we're international today, so I won't ruin anybody's intros, but very exciting to have people from around the country and around the world. So I guess with that, I'm gonna, I'll we could do intros now. Well, maybe let me come back to this slide. Give folks another minute or two to join. Just wanted to mention right now, from a meeting frequency perspective, we've been meeting every other month. We are sometimes summer gets a little bit slow, so we may make it 3 months or see what kind of people are interested in supporting. But just look out for the updated invite probably in the next few weeks when we make that final decision. I'm not going to walk through the specific positions, because it's kind of like the running joke right now is the VP of programming role has been open for several months, but I don't really care about necessarily specific titles. If you're interested in participating at all, if you want to present, if you have a challenge you want to bring and solve as a group, if you have a great idea for like a hackathon type session, we're always looking for other ways to kind of run the meeting. We're happy to keep covering relevant content, absolutely, but we want this to be everybody's group, so feel free to reach out to Gina, Sam, myself, anybody, and we'll be happy to kind of get you engaged one way or another. So the other thing I wanted to mention is, many of you kind of sign up through the meetup, very easy to do. There was a Power BI user group site that we used to encourage people to go to, and I believe still exists, but Microsoft is working with dynamic communities to kind of combine this experience into something on the Power BI .com website, community.powerbi.com. And so we're now going to be asking you to go to another location and sign up as well. The URLs here, maybe I could ask Gina also to put that in the chat, or we'll send it out probably in a follow-up email, just so everybody knows to sign up here as well. The benefit of signing up in these locations versus the meetup is, it's a great community. People ask questions, answer them all the time. There's resources available for learning or even, employment, job postings in certain cases. Some recordings are out there. One of our members a year or so back had the second most watched recording in the world. It was on predictive modeling with R and Power BI, so a really great video. Encourage you to check that one out too. But if you get a chance, definitely go in and sign up. All right. So that said, let me go back to the introduction slide. And again, so I'm Jared Brown, VP of Data and Analytics at Tallan. And the reason we created the group and, the main reason, we're continuing to kind of, push and continuing to have the meetings, cover additional topics is just to kind of make people aware of, what's available in Power BI. It's obviously a very evolutionary product, moving very quick, staying on top of the updates, itself is a challenge. So really looking, to use this group as an opportunity to kind of share those experiences, help people learn and, solve some problems too. So anybody else want to go next?
Sure, I could go. My name's Sam Kelly. I work at Tallan as well. I'm a senior consultant here. For the last bullet point, I'll go with my goal of participating in this user group. For me, I want to make sure that I'm keeping up with the latest trends in Power BI. But additionally, I do a lot of Power BI governance work, so different approaches to sort of tackling that is always interesting to me. So I'd love to hear, people's approaches around governance if it ever comes about.
I'll go next. Right. I'm Graham Atkinson. I'm also with Tallan. In fact, I sit right across from Sam when we finally do get to go back to the office. Unfortunately, don't know when that will be. But like Sam, I also do a lot of work with Power BI. So I'm just here to keep up to date, stay in the loop, meet other people that are passionate about Power BI, and share stories or experiences and tips with them. So that's why I'm here, and I will be going over our monthly feature updates right after this.
So I can go next. My name's Ben Dewey. I'm a VP of Apps and Experiences at Tallan. So I'm kind of the guest speaker today talking about user experience design of Power BI and the work our team does to help our BI team, kind of some things we picked up along the way. And I guess this is kind of an observed BI trend. I was just thinking about that. I was shocked by this question, so I had to think of some on the fly. But every time we talk to customers, I always feel like, they get confused between the drill through and the drill down. So I think that's just a trend that I commonly see as people mix that up, and just kind of educating people on really the difference between drill through and drill down, because they typically say drill down when they mean drill through. And then, explaining to them kind of where and when they're both used and how they're used, I think is something that I would call a trend, I guess. But
okay, anybody else? Don't be shy. No one.
I'll take that up, Jared.
All right. Thanks, Sohail.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sohail Moinuddin. I work in District of Columbia Water and Sewer Authority, and I manage. It's a water utility, so I manage their advanced metering infrastructure. Today is not a good day, Jared. We are having thunderstorm warnings, and there are already water main breaks happening in DC and Maryland, just so you know. Yes. But we have worked with Tallan, specifically our meter consumption data was looked at by Jared and his group. They did a detailed analysis on our consumption patterns as well as our billing amounts. My intention here today is to just come in and see what new features are available in Power BI. As an organization, DC Water is investing more and more towards Power Platform. We are interested in using Power Apps, Power BI, and basically utilizing the data that we have collected over the years in terms of figuring out trends, creating and managing forecast, be it our consumption models or any assets that we own. So I'll be really interested in see what you guys have to say today. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Sohail. And I'll mention that Sohail, definitely an integral part of that, entire team. And we actually had a fun opportunity to present at the Power Platform World Tour on some of the work that we had done. So good luck. Hopefully the thunderstorms aren't too much of a problem. Might be the same ones that came through here last night.
They never are, Jared. It's the effects after it and the water main breaks.
Yeah, the saturated ground, I'm sure, all that, right? Runoff.
Yep.
Anybody else?
I'll go next. This is Rashmi Liss. I actually am kind of new to Power BI. I work in the analytics group at an insurance company called Mass Mutual. We're currently using MicroStrategy, but I am personally interested to learn more about Power BI, just because I can download this on my computer and just get started with learning. Similar sort of question around drill down and drill through. I think a lot of the business partners get confused when they say, well, we want the ability to drill down. I think that's a big challenge. So yeah.
Yeah, well, and thanks, Rashmi. And I don't know that we'll necessarily have time today, but I do have slides that we can try to go through, time permitting. Just Power BI overview. I'm sure you'll see a lot of features today, though, so hopefully that gives you a little bit of a jump start, and maybe there's some other resources we could share to help you get started.
I can tie a distinction between drill down and drill through into my demo, Jared. I can do that pretty easily. So we can talk about that a little later.
Anybody else? Alrighty. Going once. All right. Well, that said, we won't take any more time. If people would like to chime in and ask questions later, feel free to do so again, and introduce yourself then. But unless there's anything else, we'll kind of proceed with the agenda shown here. So I will go ahead and hand it over to Graham to kick off the monthly feature summary. And Graham, I think you're covering a couple months, right?
Yep. I will be covering April and May of this year.
All right. Sounds good. All right. Well, I will stop sharing and feel free to take it away.
All right. Can everybody see the slide that I have up?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
Perfect. All right. Yeah, so I'm going to be going over the new feature summaries from the months of April and May this year. Every single month of the year, except for sometimes January, Microsoft releases a set of updates for Power BI, and they post about them in their blog. So what we do every month is we pull those updates out and list out the most important ones in our Power BI user group. So what we have here is the updates for April broken into 4 sections. So in the first section under reporting, I will say before we jump into it that some of these updates in April are actually very exciting. There's some pretty cool ones here. And the first one of those really cool updates is the Power Automate for Power BI. So this is a brand new visual that Power BI has made available to its users. And essentially what it allows you to do is integrate a flow into your report. And Sam's going to be covering this a lot more in depth later. So I'm going to leave it to him to explain all the things that you can do. But I will prime it by saying that this is super exciting and something that I plan on finding excuses to find use cases for. The next thing under our reporting section is a continuation of the updates to the small multiples preview feature. So we've talked about this in our past few meetings, small multiples is a way to break down your visualizations similarly to a legend, rather than having, say, multiple lines on a bar chart, to actually break your chart into multiple charts. So I'll show kind of what that looks like later, but they continue to add features to small multiples. And this month there were some minor ones. They added some additional padding options. They allow you now to use combo charts, and we'll see a few additional changes in May as well. So stay tuned for that. The next thing in the reporting section is new and improved shapes. And although this doesn't sound super interesting, this actually opens the door for a lot of kind of creativity that you can do within Power BI. Previously, when you went to insert a shape in Power BI, you had 5 options. You could import a line, a box, a circle, a triangle, or an arrow. And now there are many, many more. I think there's at least 30 now, and they all have a much more customizable appearance. You can do different layering, different glow, shadow effects, all kinds of things. And while that sounds completely stylistic, and it can really kind of light up your report when you use these shapes to, draw arrows between things that might be related or put things in a box. It really makes your report pop. And the final thing in the reporting section here is the ability to invert the axis of any chart that has a continuous axis. So this applies to line charts, column charts, area charts, all of those things that, maybe on a y-axis you have an increasing value. You can now invert that so it will increase going down the chart. I will show that in the demo as well. And I will say that although it's not included in this month's update, they do say that in the future, they're actually planning on doing axis sorting so that you can, like, on the fly, say, sort a date by something other than just, ascending order. But as I said, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a short demo I have planned after this. Moving into the modeling section, a few kind of minor changes were made to some DAX functions in the month of April. The first is to the cross filter DAX function. So cross filter is a way that you can filter a set of data in, like, a measure to be filtered by a different table. And now cross filter supports many-to-many relationships. Previously, you could say you want a many-to-one filter. Now you can say you want many-to-many going left to right or many-to-many going right to left. So a little bit more flexibility with the cross filter. I don't think everybody uses this necessarily, but it's nice to know that it's there if you do take advantage of DAX measures. And then the second update to the modeling here is minor improvements to the if and switch DAX functions. So these are only performance enhancements. I believe what they said in the documentation is for very complex if and switch statements, the performance will not execute all branches, and it will minorly improve performance. I wasn't really able to test this because I didn't have any complicated enough if or switch statements. But according to their documentation, the performance is slightly better now. Moving over to the other side of the screen here in our data and connectivity. The first bullet is text or CSV files import by example in the Power Query Editor. So similarly to how you can create a custom column by example in the Power Query Editor, you can now actually import a file by example. I will show this off a little bit later. I don't think it is an incredibly useful tool personally, and I think that it still could use some improvement. But it is nice that it's there. And I think if you are kind of new to Power BI and new to the Power Query Editor, using a import by example is a really good way to start, because what it will do is it will allow you to kind of tell Power BI how you want your data to look after it's imported, and then it will do all the work for you and tell you exactly what steps it took. But as I said, we will look at that later. They also added the ability for automatic table detection from Excel files and JSON files. So once again, if you connect to an Excel file or a JSON file in the Power Query editor, the table detection is just a little bit better now. I actually have an example up here open in another tab, so I'm going to close out the presentation. Just for some clarity on what I mean by that, in the past, if you had an Excel sheet that looked like this sheet 1 here, and you imported this into Excel, it would only ask you if you wanted to import all of sheet 1. And then you would have to kind of figure out how to do these transformations to turn these 3, well, they're not really tables, but these 3 sections of data into tables. The only time that your tables would be recognized in Excel is if you had a named range or an Excel table. Now, however, Power BI has the ability to automatically recognize these kind of sections of data, like this one here. And you can see down in the bottom, it's recognized 3 different tables that it will say, do you want to turn this into a table? So pretty cool functionality. I'm sure that most people that have worked with Power BI have at some point imported something from Excel. And just knowing that they are, still working on making that connection a little bit better is good to see. All right, jumping back into our slides here. They've done a similar thing for JSON files. Same type of deal. If you have nested data within JSON, Power BI is much better now at recognizing tables that you might want to create. And the final section for the month of April is in the service. They've added kind of a new way to share your reports with links. So rather than, if you wanted to share a report with a teammate, rather than copying the entire URL of a report, you can now generate a nice quick link to give to them. And there's a few options when you create this link. You can share it with people only inside your organization. And there's a few other options. I didn't have a huge amount of time to explore exactly how sharing with people outside of your organization works with links. But they are trying to make it an easier experience in the service to both manage your reports and share your reports. They also improve the create on top of published dataset experience. So when you're in the Power BI service, you actually have this ability to create a new report based on a data set that already exists in the service. Not something that a lot of people use, but is available. And they have made that experience a little bit better, where now when you go to create a report, it uses what they call the dataset hub experience. So they have a nicely organized collection of data sets, and you can now just click on one and create a report from it. And the final thing here for the month of April is a few new capabilities are now available in deployment pipelines. So deployment pipelines are not something we're going to cover today in terms of what they are. Essentially, they're just a way to push your reports kind of in a governed way from workspace to workspace. But the capability that's been added is the ability to push paginated reports. So include that in your pipeline. And also, I believe, pushing of security labels. So just some minor things for the deployment pipelines. If you haven't explored deployment pipelines before, I do encourage you to check them out. They are very cool. But that's it for the month of April. If there's any questions on any of these bullet points, now is a great time to ask. Otherwise, I'll move into May.
Just mention that before you get too excited about deployment pipelines, they do require premium or premium per user, which is a very affordable option now. Premium per user, it's an additional $10 a month for people, but then everybody in that workspace would have to have that. So
that's a good point. Thanks, Jared. All right, so moving on into the month of May, a little bit shorter list here, and I will start off by saying that anything that has the word preview after it in parentheses is a preview feature in Power BI. And what a preview feature is something that you can have access to if you go into the options, into preview features, and there's going to be a list of checkboxes. And if you check off a preview feature, it'll become available for you. But most preview features are not available out of the box. You have to actually enable them. So the first one here under the reporting section is modern visual tooltips. So these are pretty damn cool, actually. They allow you now to drill down and drill through your data through a tooltip rather than having to right-click on a data point or clicking on the visual header that pops up. You can now do it directly through a tooltip. They've also improved the look of tooltips so they better match the theme of the reports. And generally, they're just more visually appealing now. Once again, that's a preview feature, so if you want to experience that, you'd have to turn it on. The small multiples is now on by default. So I mentioned earlier that the small multiples preview allows you to categorize your data in a different way than a legend. Now, instead of having to go into the preview menu and enable it, it's just enabled. So if you start Power BI as a new user now, you would see the preview or the small multiples rather box on like a line chart. I think they do this because technically it's still in preview, but they're just about ready to release it. But I guess this does allow you to turn it off if you want to. Additionally, the new field list, which has been in preview for quite some time now, is now generally available. So this is now going to be applied to all Power BI reports. And the field list is just when you have a Power BI report open, on the right side of your screen is your list of tables and fields. A few months back, they changed how that looks and feels. We talked about that then. But now that update is available in out-of-the-box Power BI. And the final thing under reporting here is support for removing a sensitivity label. Now, in the Microsoft documentation, they specifically say they do not recommend you ever do this, but they have added support. If you want to remove a data sensitivity label, there's now a button for you to do that. Under our analytics section here, just a singular bullet point for smart narratives and anomaly detection are generally available. Now, both of these are very exciting. And once again, both of these are being covered by Sam a little bit later in our presentation tonight. So I'm not going to talk too much about them, but I will kind of give a general overview. The smart narratives is a really cool, not really visual, but it's a button that you can click in Power BI that will create for you basically a text box that explains or attempts to explain what is going on in a visual. And Power BI actually does a pretty good job of explaining what's going on. I've tested it on a number of reports and was pretty impressed. The anomaly detection, kind of a similar thing. You can click a button and it will detect anomalies for you in your data. Once again, Sam's going to be covering those, so that's all I'll say on them at the moment. In the service, in our last section here for the month of May, you can now quickly create reports from SharePoint lists. So I actually didn't have any SharePoint lists to make a demo of, but what they say in the documentation is just in a few clicks, you can now kind of automatically create a report off of a SharePoint or a Microsoft list. They've added reports, apps, and data flow endorsements. So you have always been able to endorse a data set. So what that means is you can mark it as certified or promoted, and that will increase visibility and kind of tell users within your organization that this data set should be used or is the only one to use, depending on kind of how you're defining your endorsements. But now these same endorsements can be applied to reports, apps, and data flows. So cool to see. If you have, a singular app that you want your users to view, maybe that's the certified app. In addition to that, the datasets hub has seen some improvements. So I mentioned in the month of April that this hub is kind of something that they're working on to improve how you explore and see your datasets in the service. I think the improvements for the month of May were a table list. So now if you click on a data set, it'll show you all of the tables in that data set and all of the columns in those tables. And I believe that there was an options menu so that when you go into a data set, you can actually change some options directly from the service, whereas normally you would have to open the report that that data set lives in and actually make the changes there. And then the final bullet point we have here is quick edit for paginated reports in the service. So if you have any paginated reports published up to the service, you can now just through a single click, actually right click and then click on the button, you can open up the Power BI report builder to edit those paginated reports. So just a easy access for editing your paginated reports. So that's it for the month of May. If there's no questions, I'm going to move on to a quick demo. Won't take more than 10 minutes, and then I will be handing it off for our feature presentation. All right, looks like there's no questions.
I have just a quick thing to add for sensitivity labels. Anyone who's interested in sensitivity labels in particular, it's worth knowing that there is some additional setup that's required in order to use them for Power BI. Part of it is setting up the labels and policies to expose those to your users in the Security and Compliance Center. And the other part is actually enabling a tenant setting for Power BI.
Great, thanks, Sam. All right, so I'm going to open up just a really simple Power BI report I have here just to show off some of these features that I just discussed. So what I have here is, very simple report, definitely not finished or not good looking at this point, and it's using the Power BI sample data set. This is the data set that I usually use for demos like this, but it's a data set that's available to everybody out of the box. When you open up Power BI, there's a little button in its splash screen that says try the sample data. So that's what we have here, and I've created 3 simple visuals on the first page. We have profit year to date and discounts year to date. This is a measure that's cumulative year to date profits and discounts over a 1-year period. And what I wanted to show here is, you have your profits, which are steadily climbing throughout the year, but then you have discounts, which in this data set is kind of a subtraction from your profits. So maybe you don't want to show this climbing throughout the year. Maybe you want to show this, decreasing. And while you could probably create a measure to make that value negative, what you can do now with the inverting of the axis is clicking on the visual and going into formats, and under y-axis, you can now just simply invert the axis, and we can see that, starting from 0 million, now ascending to 8 million, it's going downwards. So we can see that over the course of the year, this is kind of our, for lack of a better term, profits lost to discounts. So, kind of a cool feature. And, as I mentioned, for the inverting of the axis and sorting of a continuous axis, they plan on in future months making it so that you can do similar things for a date, or even organize a date differently than just by a continuous ascending or descending cycle. Down here in the bottom of our page, I have units sold broken down by months, and what I wanted to show off in this visual is the new tooltips, which are in preview. So I've enabled the preview feature, and just for completeness, I'll show you how to do that. If you go to File, Options and Settings, click Options. In this menu, when it pops up, there it is. Down here in preview features, we have this kind of long list of preview features, and these are all of the features that we've covered in today's look at the monthly updates, as well as past months looks. These are all features we've talked about, and you can enable them or disable them simply by clicking on the check mark. So I have the new tooltips preview feature enabled, and we can see that if I hover over one of these bars, I'm hovering over January right now, it kind of shows us the month, the units sold in kind of a different font and format than the old tooltip would, but we also have this new button to drill down. So normally if I wanted to drill into the month of January, there's 2 ways that I could do it. I could right click on it. So I'm not going to use that drill down yet. I'm going to right click on January, and we can see I can drill down doing that. Or I can turn on drill down and just click on January, and that would allow me to drill down as well. But now with this new tooltip, you can just hover over it, and you can select to drill down. So we're going to drill down into the month of January here, and now we can see in the month of January which countries sold the most or had the most units sold. And once again, if I hover over these, I can drill back up, but I can also drill through. So I've actually created another page that is drill through by country. So from here, I can actually just click on drill through, go to a whole nother page, country analysis. Didn't click on it, hold on. Drill through to country analysis. And we can see that the drill through, once it loads, the drill through works. So we have the country of Canada, and we have all of this data specific to Canada. And I'll show that if I do choose a different country, it also works. So if I go into Mexico now, this is somewhat annoying. It looks like you have to be pretty careful with where you put your mouse. I'm sure that's something they'll look into. But now when I click on Mexico, it'll drill down into Mexico. We can see the different countries selected, and we have different data values. So just kind of a cool new way to utilize drill down and drill through tooltips, which may or may not be more intuitive for your users. But that is what the new tooltips are all about. And the next thing that I'm going to talk about is the new shapes. So as I mentioned before, Power BI originally had 5 different shapes that you could import. There are now many more. You can pretty much get kind of whatever you want as a shape, and if if these don't suit your needs, you can always get an image. But these shapes, in addition to just having more shapes available to you, there's actually a lot more formatting that you can do on these shapes. So I have this new pentagon arrow shape up here. I've hooked that up to an action to go to page 2. And now each of these shapes has kind of a different effect. We have our defaults. This shape has a shadow under it. This one has a glow. You can, going into your shape, you can change all of these. You can change a rotation, you can change all sorts of things about the shape to kind of get the exact look and feel that you want with your report. And while this is not a super important feature to the functionality of your report, as I mentioned, I think adding a shape to the right place or like containing a visual within a box, little things like that, they really make the report feel finished and polished. So I will go back to the main report here. And then there was just one last thing that I wanted to show off before I finish up and pass off the presentation. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about was the importing CSV and text files by example. So let me first show you what the creating a custom column by example looks like. I did mention that they're very similar. So in the Power Query Editor, for those of you that are familiar with Power BI, you've probably seen the screen many times. If you're kind of a beginner to Power BI, you can think of the Power Query Editor as kind of a funnel for your data that takes in all of your sources, takes in all of your raw data, does whatever transformations you apply, and then passes off to Power BI a completed data set that you can then begin working on. So in the Power Query Editor, if I wanted to create a custom column, we'll just do a really simple one. I'll do add column from examples from selection. So what that's going to do is it's going to, in a second, yeah, we have our new column over here. And if I type in a value, let's go 1000, something like that. And actually, do something that's easier for it to guess. Essentially what we're doing here is putting in a value, and Power BI is going to try to guess what the operation that I want it to perform is. So I'm going to put in 618.5. And now it's already guessed that for each of these, I want to subtract 1,000. And we'll say that's good enough. Now, it's going to create this new column when I press OK, and it's going to now have a column that has actually M that it's written for me. M is the language of Power Query Editor. So it's written M for me to apply this transformation. And if I wanted to see what that was, I could go into the advanced editor. I'm not going to get too caught in the weeds here. I just kind of want to give an idea of what creating a column from example is, so that when we talk about creating a table by example, we kind of have a starting point. So back in Power BI, if I go into get data and then go into text CSV, I've set up a very simple CSV file. In here, test CSV. So I have this, pretty generic CSV file. It's just four rows and 3 columns. But now there's this new button in the bottom left, extract table using examples. I'm going to click that. And now I'm going to start entering data, and you'll see Power BI start to guess at what I want the table to look like. So in column 1, row 1, we're going to put A. And in column 1, row 2, we're going to put B. And there, Power BI has guessed that I want C and D in columns for rows 3 and 4. Now I'm going to do the same thing in column 2. We'll put 100. Power BI has guessed correctly that I want, the values that should be in column 2. And then finally, the date for this column was 6/10/2021. And Power BI has once again guessed that this is what I want. And we can change the names of these columns. Key, value, date. And now if I click load, it'll create a new table for me that looks just like that. And it will actually apply the M steps that are required to get it to look like that. So if you are maybe uncomfortable using the Power Query Editor or uncomfortable with M query language, this is kind of an easy way to create your table from a text or CSV file and have Power BI kind of do some of the work for you. Now there's pretty limited functionality. As I said, I'm a little bit unimpressed with all of the functionality of this feature. You can't really do too many complex operations at the moment, but it is a brand new feature, and I'm sure that they will be adding more to it. But with that is all of the topics I had to cover for the months of April and May. Once again, if there's any questions on any of those, feel free to speak up. Otherwise, I'm going to be passing it off to Ben Dewey.
Not so much a question, but I don't think any update from Power BI has made me happier than this shapes thing.
Yeah,
They finally have. It used to be like when you would expand the shapes all the way to the corners, it wouldn't fill all the way to the corners. It would have like a little like border where it would like shrink into the shape at the full box. And now you can fill all the way to the corner. This is going to revolutionize my reports.
Oh yeah, totally.
Also using just having to use images for custom things is trying to get out of that game. That's like HTML, in the early 2000s sort of stuff. It doesn't feel right.
Absolutely.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. You can feel free to take it away, Ben.
All right. I'll grab the screen here first. And then let me just close out of that. All right. So go ahead and get this started. All right. Can you guys see my screen? Tell me I can't see, but.
Just see a picture of you.
Okay, then let's try this again. Okay,
there we go.
All right, so I'm just sharing the PowerPoint now. So yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Ben Dewey again, part of the VP of the Apps and Experiences group at Tallan. I'm by no means a Power BI expert. I certainly rely on these guys and their expertise when building this. And one of the things, specifically around user experience design and Power BI, using some of the tools that we typically use, it's very important to have that kind of technical feasibility check with the Power BI experts as we're going through it, because we know our way around Power BI and we know what we can do, but you can certainly get in a trap, especially if you have a user experience team at your company where they'll design something specifically, talking about the shapes things before. They can design something that can be pretty tricky to build. And so we like to kind of think of ourselves as kind of tech savvy, because it takes takes a bit of user experience design thinking around the technical implementation about what's going to be look good but also fairly easy to build, and work well for the users. So, and as I just said, looks good. I think one of the other things I always like to kind of explain to people when we talk about user experience is, we're not really graphic designers per se. When we talk about user experience, it's really thinking about the flow, the process design, workflow design. How do we take a workflow and modify a workflow so that a series of screens kind of fits well together and makes sense, as opposed to going through it just making it look pretty with the fancy pictures and colors. So without further ado, I just wanted to kind of take some time today to just share some of the stuff that we've seen, and some of the things about how we approach it, and hopefully that will kind of lend a little insight to you guys in terms of what you can think about to try to be your own user experience designer on your next Power BI projects. So I'm going to talk about three things today. Really just want to focus a little bit on the design process, like I said, about how we go through it. We'll talk about some tips and tricks, and the demos. I kind of sprinkled them throughout, but if we have time at the end, I'll kind of show a couple more. But for the most part, I actually ended up sprinkling all the demos throughout. So I don't know if you guys have seen this slide before. I know Jared has shared it before, but I think it's important to kind of think about, when you're designing Power BI reports and dashboards in general, understanding where you're at from a maturity perspective, or where the organization is at from a maturity perspective. You don't want to go into, advanced forecasting and really complex storytelling of insights that you've uncovered if you haven't gotten the basic models and some of the basic reports out there. So this is kind of just a nice kind of way to look at the maturity of an organization in this kind of analytics endeavor. So, the key message for me here is really trying to figure out, when we get into an organization, where are they at? What are they trying to do? Let's not boil the ocean. Let's kind of get them to their next step and move from there. In terms of our design process, I think there's kind of two main flavors that we see a lot of. The first one I call more data model first, and I think this is really ideal for analysts and self-service sort of users. So people who are comfortable with Power BI desktop, can work with it and manipulate the information that they need and build their own reports. It's something that development teams can leverage all the existing sources and pull in data from different models and put that together fairly quickly, and then put it out there to the analysts to kick the tires on and try out and start to kind of really gain some insight into what's going on. It's a little different in terms of the use case first approach, because when you design something for a generic model perspective, you haven't thought through some of the use cases, and so therefore you might miss some of those gaps. So just wanted to note that it's not necessarily suited for every use case, and there's a very good chance that you're going to find something that was missed as you're going through and looking at some of the specifics. And then the last one is that it does require care and feeding. I think one of the big things about putting out there a self-service approach is to watch what happens and to see how people are using it and kind of respond to the different measures that are missing, and what the team can add and make sure that it's all included. So certainly a very good approach. Certainly if you're in early on in sort of the maturity phase, and if you're very data oriented, it's a very good approach. The other side is kind of a use case first approach. And I think this is really where, from a user experience perspective, it's a little more comfortable for how we typically approach other projects and web development projects. It's really ideal for a very specific purpose. You're trying to analyze a situation, or you're trying to, take a process that they're currently using Excel for and try to, make it more, make it an easier process. It does require that user experience analysis. I think if you are able to, you don't just want to take a use case and just design something new. You want to do the typical process that you do for a user experience exercise and dissect the application kind of as is, and then look at how would we redesign it and get kind of more of a to be process that works and takes advantage of the technology. It is designed for a specific goal in mind. So while the other side is, not necessarily good for use case, you can have the opposite of impact on the use case first. You can certainly design something that has a very specific use case in mind and is not general purpose. And so definitely don't want to go into something from a use case perspective, expecting it to be something that's going to work for everyone's use case. And then the last one is it's really something that's easy to transition into forecasting or some advanced analytics because it isn't a specific topic. You're already looking at taking a specific kind of context and, circling around it and doing analysis all around it. You quickly kind of realize where you want to learn more about it and where you want to dig deeper. And I think that's a typical sort of pattern that we see after they've started using the use case approach to kind of grow from there. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the data model first. I mean, really, we're talking about taking multiple data sources and kind of combining them. Jared's kind of gotten me to kind of learning a lot about the difference between the ETLs and ELTs and some of the changes that are happening. I know we do a lot of work in kind of the modern data estates and how we handle data in the cloud. But at the end of the day, you need to kind of get all the data from the different sources and put it into a place that Power BI can read it from easily. You're thinking about the data sources, the columns, and the tables. We can kind of put it into a data warehouse or a Power BI data set. But generally, it's going to be a star schema or something that's dedicated for reporting and fairly general purpose. Certainly, with this too, is the opportunity to rename columns and make sure that they're kind of named appropriately. Oftentimes you have different sources and they'll both have the same definition of a customer. So you have to kind of figure out, who's got the actual, definition of a customer and, maybe there's kind of different terminology that needs to be sorted out as part of that. But that's really the key to making that successful is trying to figure out a way to make sure the naming convention makes sense for the business users. Now, on the use case first approach, this is a little bit of a messy slide, but it's kind of how we work sometimes. We use a tool called Mural. It is a online collaborative tool, so it has Post-it notes that you can drag and drop and move around. So at the top, you see we do a bit of a persona discovery session where we try to figure out who the users are, what their use cases that they're trying to use it for are, and then we'll even bring in kind of competitive analysis. We'll find charts online to figure it out. On the bottom, we're looking more at the user journey. So that's where I talked a little bit earlier about taking a process and doing a workflow and kind of modifying that workflow along the way. We do a very linear approach to it. It's also kind of very closely in my mind related to how we go through our user acceptance testing. The idea is, the first sticker is step 1, and step 2, step 3, step 4 after that. And then that can kind of be something that is their grounding point to make sure that we're, talking about the use case in the right way. This example here was for a kind of a project management SaaS reporting dashboard, and you can see, with these kind of ideas and inspirations, we're looking at like a burn-up chart. So we wanted to kind of use that as an opportunity to explain to customers, hey, have you thought about looking at the data in this sort of way, in this sort of visualization? There's a really cool tool that I'm going to mention a little later called the visual vocab, which kind of helps you get a good understanding. So something I'll wait to talk a little more about that, but it's definitely something that not only the designers of the dashboards need to think about, but I think also the business users need to be aware of so that they can, understand the right chart for the right cases. So again, fairly zoomed out, but I wanted to just kind of show you how we then approach that use case design. So we go from those cards and that user journey over to the same kind of step process in our design tools, and we start designing out, step by step for each screen along the way. So this is a very zoomed out view, but we then publish this out and kind of review it as part of a iterative design review process with the customer. So we're kind of talking about, you know, the screens as they're being designed. One little interesting point of note with, you know, just in general user experience design, these charts are, we always struggle because the charts can be so easy to drag and drop in Power BI. So if you have good sample data, I could put together this chart with all these bars in a few minutes, but on the design tools where you're actually having to draw some of the rectangles by hand, it can take a lot longer. So we're always kind of battling with, I should just do this in Power BI, or should I do this in some of these design tools? So just a kind of a point of note that we struggle with how powerful Power BI is to whip something up. Versus like a typical web application or something like that. Sorry, a little tangent there, but this is an example of something that we did in a design tool. So it does show, you know, very, very kind of conceptual what it's supposed to roughly look like in Power BI, and then when we build it out, it would be, you know, pixel perfect and as expected. So talking about these use cases, I wanted to just show a couple of examples of use cases that we've come across, and, you know, try to get your head around kind of what we mean by those use cases and how those play into what we're looking to do. So the first one here is, you know, one of our most popular dashboards that we actually use internally, and I think the reason for that is because it's used when we host a meeting. So we do just a kind of a check of the team and what we call our resource call, and this is the backdrop of that call, and we use it every single week, and everyone's checking in on a regular basis, and so it's become the most popular chart because it's used on a weekly meeting. It's used on that recurring basis. So that's always one of the first things I'll ask, you know, clients is, you know, are you planning on presenting this in any place? You know, is there some executive summary or executive presentation at a quarterly meeting that happens? Are you doing any sort of a recurring meeting where this data is going to be used? And it's not uncommon for us to hear from clients that they went ahead and, you know, took a Power BI report and they copied a screenshot of it and they put it into a PowerPoint, and then they're presenting this, you know, quarterly executive summary from a PowerPoint. And so our answer always to them is, you know, don't present from the PowerPoint, present it, you know, from the chart directly, and let's build you the chart to make sense of exactly where you're going. The next one here was a cool example. This is actually Power BI embedded, and it's really more embedded on the top section here. But what we were looking to do is provide some terms information for a customer, for a customer's contract, and we're basically able to filter along the top and come up with a customer that was in a similar industry, similar sort of size deal that they were doing, a similar geography, and then from that they're able to, you know, bring in an aggregated list of other people that are in that similar group, and really just kind of give them an export of exactly, you know, the type of data that they're looking for. Some additional ones that I wanted to talk about. We had a customer who was doing an external portal for some external customers, and they really just wanted to have a status report. They were constantly building out reports in a tabular format and emailing those out. And so it really came down to how can we build a portal? And so the specific use case was just building a portal to give them a status update of where they were and where their projects were, from both a timing perspective as well as overall turnaround time, volume perspective and a turnaround time. And the last one was looking at something where we had a customer who had an Excel spreadsheet that they were converting over into Power BI. This gets back to one of the tips, but what they did was they essentially had a lot of source data. So they had 4 different areas where they were pulling in source data, and they were combining things. There was also a utilization report, so they were combining things like their headcount and their recruiting numbers, and they were comparing it against their sales information and their active, you know, projections for their projects. And then based on that information, they were looking to have some forecasted value about what type of how many people they needed to recruit, right? So it was this long drawn out process that they used multiple Excel spreadsheets, but ultimately they got this answer at the end. It was like, we need to hire 5 people. And so that is a kind of I'll save a little for the the tips, but it was a cool example of us being able to flip it around and really just take that process and literally flip it completely backwards, and design the use case based on that process that was flipped around. All right, so any questions on kind of that use case approach, or the use case versus the data model first approach? All right, so let me jump in here to a couple of tips and tricks. The first one is, really deploying and understanding the visual vocabulary. You can Google it, and we can even post a link. I don't know if one of you guys want to, grab the link and post it. But this has a number of different categories of charts that, are categories of charts that, and then when you drill into them, you can see specific charts and what they're used for, how we, what common use cases there could be, and then what they look like. So this is, again, a tool that I think is kind of imperative that everyone who's designing charts fully understands. Any designers that you have on your team, I think they should really understand this and kick the tires and know what's available and how it should be used, as well as the business users that you're talking to, especially if they're in the position to be making recommendations of the type of charts that they'd want to see in the reports. It really kind of helps you avoid everything being a bar chart or everything being a pie chart. And because they're familiar with what's available, they can make better recommendations. The next one, I kind of hinted at this, but really, build for the maturity of the team. You certainly don't want to go throwing some super advanced machine learning and analytics reports when there's not even a basic data warehouse set up. So you got to crawl before you walk. Make sure you're kind of you understand where your business is at and where your organization is, and then go ahead and take the small steps it takes to kind of get to that level of maturity that you're looking for. When we build our use cases, we typically have a cluster of them around a common theme. So in this case, we had both financial planning as well as a utilization analysis, and then within there was different information that different use cases and journeys that they could go through. And so what's really nice about Power BI is that you can do something. Well, it's always recommended that we have some sort of a navigation or some sort of a menuing system. And then when we have multiple use cases, we typically like to put it on a home page. And then from there, we'll go ahead and add interactivity to it. So it's not just a very static homepage that has some links, but it ends up being a little bit bigger and more of a table of contents, and actually provide some interactivity to kind of hint you that what that section is about. So as you can see with both of these, they have not only interactive content that gives you a 3-month utilization, but they also have static content that's not going to change. It's just more of a, for visual purposes and to kind of clue the user in. This last tab, we actually have it, it's kind of hidden behind here on this other one, but we also do a tab for data administration. One of the things that is pretty nice when you're, cleaning up your tables as you're importing them is to kind of, take any of the errored out information and dropping them into a table for, where those errors are. And then this looks at that errored out, any columns that were errored out, any columns that had, incorrect conversions or null values that weren't supposed to be there. And essentially would just give you a list of the rows that are in that table here. And we call those our exceptions. But you can click into this category in this report. It'll show you both the list of exceptions, kind of what the error message is, as well as the last updated date, last refresh date for the application. This is the one I was talking about a little bit for the for flipping the script on, or flipping the process around for that capacity planning. So on the left-hand side, you'll see here, we're kind of taking our projects that are coming in. So the active projects are the dark blue, and then the light blue is our sales pipeline of information. And then from there, they basically take the green line is a combination of the capacity, which is a combination of the head count plus the recruiting projections. And so in the original process, what they were doing was taking the headcount information and on a spreadsheet, adding it all up, taking the recruiting information and adding it all up, taking the sales pipeline and adding it up. and then they'd produce the number here. If we're looking out here in, what is this, May or June, there's a decrease where the green is lower than the expected demand for projects. And there's, you can kind of see here in the tooltip, this is just a screenshot, but you can see in the tooltip that there's a gap of 5. So, what we essentially did was completely flip that around and said, instead of having all this data lead to this answer, build out the forecasted information and have this chart be the starting point. So you can look here and visually see where the headcount starts coming in, and then from there you can click onto it, and then you can drill through into the different areas that were made up the data. So the headcount and the recruiting information. So it was just a really nice way to kind of help describe to the client, hey, you don't necessarily, the way you're looking at it, it's not a direct translation. You actually have to completely break your mindset of how you're currently doing it, because with the new power of the tool, you're able to look at this in a completely different way. The last the last one with screenshots here is about kind of storytelling. So as part of that later side of the maturity, if you have analysts that are working within an application and they are very comfortable with the data set and they're working with it, they may find some sort of key piece of analytics. In this case, over on the right-hand side, you see a plus 300% increase in construction and a negative 89%, or an 89% decrease in healthcare. So what we did with this client was they basically used this information as part of a summary that they would take out on sales calls to show some of their customers. And what was really nice about it, or what was unique about it, was that it was specifically highlighting information that they could kind of tailor for their industry. So if you selected the industry, it then goes and filters everything into this technology industry. So it becomes very similar to a PowerPoint slide, but it has that interactivity. In addition, you can even click on the pie chart and have it update the slides over here. So really, powerful how you can take something that, would feel like a sales presentation and a PowerPoint and actually use Power BI itself to mimic PowerPoint and give you interactivity that was meant to kind of wow their customers. The thing a little interesting just in some of the insights is that it wasn't all kind of interactive. There are certain things that they added. So the analysts, this 300% increase in construction was more static information. So it was a mix of, dynamic information that they could look at with static information that their analysts uncovered or findings that they uncovered. So we've talked about this with a number of people. I think that we're seeing a trend around how do we do more storytelling type slides. It lands really well with executives as well as customers. So if we're trying to depending on the audience we're trying to speak to, this can be worth the effort because you're really trying to find a way to make it super simple for them to understand. A few additional tips here I just wanted to run through. Use names that are meaningful to the business user. I think that's one of the key ones from a user experience perspective is, we're not trying to just take the data model from the database and use the column names. We really want to understand who the user is that's going to be using it and try to use their name. There's a very common example in the user experience world about, a company having multiple definitions of a customer. Your customer service or your IT department's customer may be an employee, whereas the customer for a customer service department is going to be an end customer. So just going on the database name is not necessarily going to be suited to the audience. So understand the audience and making things meaningful for them is definitely a key one. Providing good titles and subtitles, and as well as tooltips that really provide context to that highlighted information. It kind of goes a little bit in hand in hand with number 4 in a way. Titles and subtitles, super important to have very nice meaningful titles. Subtitles we typically use for filtering and sorting, so you can kind of understand a little bit of how that chart or the data on that chart is filtered. And then tooltips, specifically looking at different measures that are on there, trying to highlight, or charts trying to highlight what what they actually mean, how they're calculated. I also even tool KPIs is another big one where we'll typically have a KPI and you try to keep the word pretty short, but there can be a lot of nuance behind what that KPI means and how it's calculated. So that's an area where we'll create a button object, and as you mouse over it, it pops up a tooltip to kind of give you just an informational tooltip to show you as you hover what it looks like or how it's calculated. Number 3, looking at trying to highlight the most important information. Power BI does a good job with the KPIs of doing that. The KPI numbers are super large. We do a good job. We like to think a lot about the font on ramp when we do user experience design. So what's the biggest font on the screen? What's the smallest? Darker fonts versus lighter fonts. You always want to try to be conscious of where the eye is drawn, and your eye is going to draw more towards darker colors, bolder colors, and larger colors. So the things you want them to pay attention to, you make bigger. The things you don't, you make smaller and lighter. Number 4, limiting the number of visuals on the dashboard and reports. It's very common for people, especially when you're looking at data model first, to just throw everything on a page. That added care of kind of doing some of the user experience, I think, makes it so that we're really being conscious of limiting what goes on the dashboard, what goes on that front page, putting things in drill throughs where appropriate. From not only from a visual perspective, but also from a performance perspective, it is important to ensure you have the proper interactions between visuals. So as you click on a slicer, you click on a chart and you want it to filter a different chart, sometimes that can create some interesting effects. And it's important to kind of think through, when you click on this, do you want this other area to filter and adjust, or do you want to tie a bunch of charts together? So certainly want to be conscious of what you're tying together. And from the performance side, if you don't need the interaction, certainly disable them. It's going to make the chart more responsive. And then the last one we talked about internally a bit was this idea of drill down and drill through functionality. We've already seen from a number of customers that it is a little kind of confusing to just sort of get a handle on how it's meant to be used or how it should be used. It looks like the new feature that came out, I think it was in May, that has the hover with the drill through is a good kind of way to unlock some of that discoverability. But we've also done tooltips and descriptions to kind of say, hey, you can click on this button here and it'll allow you to do a drill through and kind of explain what the option is available. And then also, if you teach a user, you explain something to a user about how to do that, be consistent, right? Don't use a button up in the top left in one area and a button in the bottom to just explain the same thing. All right, and I think that kind of wraps it up. Yeah, I have a couple demos. I think we are at time though, so I'm going to go ahead and just pause there and see if we have any questions, and then maybe hand it over to Sam. Thoughts, questions? Pardon some of these typos here.
I'll just add real quick. I put the link to the visual vocab in the chat, so that's there. And I'm also going to put links to the April and May updates that Graham covered as well next. Yeah, but the visual vocab is definitely a great resource, and definitely thanks, Ben. The time that you spend understanding the end user's need is definitely time well spent. I mean, one of the main factors that can really cripple a Power BI report or even a Power BI kind of rollout is user adoption. So focusing on adoption centers of excellence to help customers understand what you're trying to achieve, and then efforts like what Ben described to make sure they're really going to resonate can be more important than the development of the report itself.
Yeah, definitely I latch on when people say that they have a quarterly meeting or a recurring meeting of some type, because the more you can champion them to use it every day, then you're kind of guaranteed to have the adoption there. Great. Well, thanks. Thank you for listening to me. Hopefully you guys got a few tidbits out of there, and you guys can take some of that back when you are asked to design or build out new charts or dashboards.
Well, I just realized I was muted, but I'll take over from here. I'm going to start sharing my screen as a backdrop, but I'll talk a little bit about the things that I'll be demoing today. So Graham mentioned it earlier. Thanks, Graham, for giving a quick overview on some of the things that I'll be showing. But today we'll start with looking at anomaly detection. From there, we will go into smart narratives. And lastly, we'll look at the Power Automate visual. So the sort of report that we're working with here is a product analysis. We're looking at things like sales or revenue over time in some different areas of products. Now for anomaly detection, just a quick overview of what it is it's a way that you can utilize Power BI to automatically detect anomalies, specifically in line chart time series data. Unfortunately, it's not supported for every visualization. It's really just the line chart. But what it does is it allows you to see expected values over time and flags anything outside of those expected values. Along with that, it gives you the opportunity to see generated explanations for the anomalies to help you determine what the root cause of that is. And each of those explanations will have like a confidence or strength percentage associated with it. This feature in particular does work in Power BI desktop, mobile, and the service. Sort of behind the scenes, if you are interested, Microsoft created their own algorithm called SRCNN. I'll provide a link in the chat for that. There's a technical blog post that they did on it. The algorithm itself was accepted by KDD. I wasn't actually sure what that was when I read that, but it's the Knowledge Discovery and Data Mining Group. So I'll drop the link for that in the chat now, but otherwise we can sort of go straight into a demo here. One thing that I will note is that this feature has been around since November 2020, although it's been in preview up until this month. So let me paste the link here. All right, sorry about that. Now let's get into it. So in this case, we will be using the line chart as that's really the only supported visual here. The way that you would actually enable anomaly detection is to click on the analytics option here in the visualizations pane. Once you click on that, the very bottom option is find anomalies. If we expand this, you can see that we have an option to add this. Now, when we click add, you'll notice that we immediately see some new information on our chart here. The sort of gray area is the expected values, the range that they're in. You can sort of customize this, whether or not it's filled or not. And then these points here are the actual anomalies themselves. Now, before we go into actually looking at those, I wanted to take a look at some of the settings associated with this. So we have initially a sensitivity setting. That setting in particular is going to determine how often these anomalies are picked up. So the higher your sensitivity is, the more anomalies you'll see. Next is the explain by field, and I thought this one was pretty cool. I'll hover over so you can read the tooltip. But essentially what this does is it allows you to specify fields in your data to look at possible explanations for why these anomalies are happening. Going forward, we have some general formatting of the anomaly points on the chart. We can choose different shapes for how we want to show it on our chart. We can change the size of it, the color of it. Here, this is where I was talking about changing whether or not the expected range is sort of filled or if it's just a line. If I change that to line here, you'll see it looks a little bit different. For sake of this example, I'll keep it as fill. And then we can change the color of that range and the transparency as well. So what the kind of cool part here is that, the anomalies are all great, but ultimately we want to see an explanation for them. So when we click on any one of these, you'll see we have some general information in the tooltip. showing that the revenue value here is outside of what the expected max value is. And that's ultimately why it got flagged as an anomaly. Now, when we click on them, we get this anomalies pane here, which actually gives us some possible explanations for why this may be occurring. Now, in this case, you'll see that, as I mentioned, there is a strength percentage. So it's always going to show the strongest guess that it has on why it's occurring. In this case, it's that the person who bought this used a promo code. The next one is the age group. Just to show you sort of how the explain by fields work here, we'll use that promo code as an example, which we can drag in here. Well, we can also use maybe the product category. So in this case, maybe we want to see what maybe a certain product is responsible for these anomalies. We can also include that. So you can definitely include multiple fields in here. And when I click apply, you'll see that this possible explanations pane will actually really just focus on those specific fields. So it's useful to sort of focus in on specific cases, but you'll also see these in the general view that we get when we don't have anything in the explain by field. Are there any questions on any of this? Otherwise, I think we can move ahead to smart narratives. All right. So we'll leave this on the chart for now, just for sake of example. But to talk a little bit about smart narratives before I go into it, as Graham said, the smart narrative is basically a text box. It actually is a visualization in Power BI that helps you quickly summarize either visuals or report pages all together. It automatically generates some of those insights, but it is also customizable after the fact. So it's a good starting point to try and address key takeaways from your report or point out trends, but you can also add your own sort of spiel to it to help someone else understand what the data being presented in a report is. So there's a couple of different ways to get the smart narrative on the page. As you'll see up here on the insert tab of the ribbon, we have the smart narrative button. Now, in this case, I don't have anything selected here, so this is going to generate a smart narrative for the entire page. So if we click this here, you'll notice once it loads that we have sort of a text box here on the right. You can see that it, in this case is talking about our revenue chart, and it even points out some of those anomalies that we had just seen through the anomaly detection. Additionally, it is covering the rest of the visualizations on the page. And as I said, we can come in here and edit things to point out what we want to point out specifically. So, if you just want to point out anomalies, you might take everything out of here, except for that. Now, I'm going to remove this here just to show you some of the other ways we can do this. So we have this button, and this might make someone think that it isn't visualization, but it actually is a visualization added here in the visualizations pane. Again, depending on what we're clicked on. In this case, we don't have any specific visual on the page selected. So again, we can click here and it will do that sort of automatic smart narrative for the whole page. Now, another way that we can do this is doing it for a specific visualization. So on any one of these visuals, and we'll use the revenue by purchasing date here, you can right click and there's a summarize option. So maybe we just want to generate a smart narrative for this chart. We come in here and click summarize, and you'll notice that this is a lot smaller and it's really just referencing the revenue data here. This feature in particular, has been around for a while as well. It went into preview in September of 2020, but again, it was released into general availability this month. Are there any specific?
I was going to say that seemed like something that's really cool in terms of just the storytelling slides that we were doing. We've done it in the past pretty statically, so this seems to to kind of maybe give you a jump on doing that.
Yeah, definitely.
The other thing, Sam, are there any of the other visuals you could click on to cross filter and show how it's dynamic?
Oh, sure. Maybe I can.
Like click on the pie chart, for instance, and does that adjust the other visuals on the page?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So notice the smart narrative updated too.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, it's definitely cool. So, like Ben touched on, definitely great for storytelling and, a great way to help people understand the data being presented in a report, especially if there's a lot of visualizations on the page. All right.
What's the visualization component for that? Sam, can you just show it once more?
Oh, the button to add it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so right at the bottom here, there's like a little page that has a dot on it. A better view of what it looks like. This is just a shrunken version of this button here, up in the insert pane. So you could do it a number of ways there.
Thanks.
Yeah, no
yeah,
problem.
one of the finance groups kind of like that too. Like if you're showing, well, I know ours does, but if you're showing a series of like cost numbers, month over month in a column chart, it's nice because it'll say like, revenue has increased for the last, 14 months, by this percentage or something like that. So there's some really kind of valuable information you could get, but you could edit it too. So you could always remove the things that maybe aren't relevant, add something that you think is.
Yeah, definitely. All right. I think if there's no other questions, we'll do a quick demo on Power Automate in Power BI. And this one I'm particularly excited about. I thought it was really cool as well. So we'll be using a really simple example here. And whoops, that's stuck to the wrong page. To talk a little bit about Power Automate, if you're not familiar with it, it's a Microsoft service that allows you to create automated workflows. You can do things like send out notifications, collect data, synchronize files. There's basically an endless number of things you can do with it, and a number of different connectors to different apps and services. So the Power Automate visual is still in preview. It came out in April, as Graham had pointed out. The way that we would actually get that into our Power BI report is this ellipses in the visualizations pane. We would select Get More Visuals, and we're actually going to App Source here. Once this loads, we're going to search for Power Automate. You'll see here that it notes that it's in preview. This in particular, you'll notice also that it's not certified. It's likely because it's still in preview, but because it's a Microsoft visual, I'd assume it will get certified pretty quickly. So once we add that in here, you'll notice that it becomes a visual that we can use, gives us a little success message, and we can then pull it in here. So to give a little information, the report that I was using this against is some users and maybe their hours that they're entering in for their work week. Now, in this case, let's say we want to report on users who have less than 40 hours entered. So you'll notice on this chart, I'm the only user that has less than 40 hours currently. So we want to sort of send a message to me over Teams, and we'll use Power Automate to do that. It has a pretty intuitive guide on how to do this, but the first step that we're going to do is drag some of the fields that we need for our automation into our field well. So because this is a visualization, we have an option to add in data. So in this case, we want email, and we want the hours associated with that email. Now, because we want to focus in on people with less than 40 hours, we're going to utilize the filters pane here and just put in that we're looking for anyone with hours that are less than 40. So once this is in here, effectively, this has filtered it down to my user. But the way that we actually go to Power Automate is by clicking the ellipses for this visualization and selecting Edit. Now, when we do this, we get brought to sort of a Power Automate page within Power BI. And I'll shrink some of these panes. And we're just going to use one of these out-of-the-box templates. So we're going to look to send a Teams message from Power BI. So we can select one of these canned templates. In Power Automate, you have to specify some connections. So I've got my user for Power BI and Teams. Now, just to build this out pretty quickly, ultimately what we do is, Power Automate is like a stepped, almost like a flow chart with some actions. So we need to fill out who we're going to post this message to. In this case, we've already supplied the email, and you'll notice that we have all of our fields that we included are specified by Power BI data. In this case, we want to use the email. It recognizes actually that there's potentially going to be multiple users here and dynamically creates this loop to send this to each user. Now, the message that we might want to send is you've entered less than 40 hours. Your current hours are, and then we can again use sort of our data that we supplied, specifying the hours field. Now, this is effectively done from a Power Automate standpoint, so we can just click Save here. And once we wait for this to save, we can come back to our report. And when we come back to our report, you'll notice that it no longer has that sort of guide that we were looking at. It looks like it should look like a button, actually, and this is an important point. After you make your flow here, you actually have to apply it. So I did it in the wrong order here, but you can do it after the fact if you've created something. Maybe you create a flow outside of Power BI and you want to apply it. That's certainly possible as well. So we've successfully applied this to our button. Now, when we go back, you'll notice that this is now a run flow button. So if we click this and using a control click here, you'll notice that it's triggered the flow, and it looks like I have a Teams notification. Once it is successful, you'll see, a check mark here. And if I actually open up my messages, you'll notice that I get an automated message from a flow bot that says, exactly our message. You've entered less than 40 hours, your current hours are and 30. So we were able to target my user and send some data from Power BI to do that. And I think the use cases here are kind of endless. I'm definitely excited to play around with this and find some new uses for it. Are there any questions around how this works? I know Power Automate might be an area.
I had just a question just on the triggering of it. So with your demo, it makes me think of like alerts or something. Is there a way that like unattended, I could have an alert to kind of pull that in, or is that not really the intended use case for this?
So I could chime in on that one.
Sure.
Yeah. So this is a Power Automate flow triggered from like a data-enabled report, right? But Power BI behind the scenes also lets you set alerts. So from the Power BI service, you could set alerts that go to push notifications, emails using built-in Power BI functionality. But there's also an option there to trigger a Power Automate flow as well. So from the Power BI service on a dashboard, a visual that's either a KPI, card, or gauge, you have the option to trigger a threshold-based alert. And the options for notifications are push notification, email, or a flow. So that's how.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, that use case is available, just not necessarily through. You wouldn't use this visual to do it. You do push notification into Power Automate as a separate push notification trigger. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. I think you definitely could do it with Power Automate as well, right?
Yeah.
You could. This button might simply trigger a flow that does some comparison of your data to determine whether or not it needs to send out alerts. So I think that could definitely be possible as well.
Yeah, but that would have to be a user initiated
definitely,
action.
Definitely, yeah. Yes.
So actually, if you go to Power Automate itself, and just look at some of the templates,
Yep.
if you don't mind, Sam. There's some Power Automate things that can stream data into Power BI, and there's some that are just search for Power BI in there, and I think you'll see both sets, like ones that consume Power BI dataset activities. And yeah, see when you have the Power BI icon on the left, it's something that's triggered by Power BI. And there's the one that you were asking about right there, right? Or if Power BI is on the right-hand side of the the little icons, it's writing to a Power BI dataset. So your flow, so you got to take it full circle, right? Your flow that is triggered by a user clicking a button because someone's notifications too low can record the fact that that notification was sent back to a Power BI data set, right?
Yeah, you could definitely get really creative with it. Well, that's pending any other questions around this. That's about all I've got for my demo here. So thanks to everyone for listening.
I got a quick question, Sam.
Sure.
You're going through this just triggered a thought in my mind. Is there a way to trigger the flow from some other event in a Power BI report that you know of?
I know you can trigger a flow from Power BI alerts. I'm not sure outside of that.
You can have a link, in, like when you click a link, like a web URL, hit a specific URL that's something is monitoring and kick off the workflow that way. What do you have in mind, Graham?
So I was thinking like auditing of a Power BI report, because I saw that you could put in the user ID. It would be really cool if you could like audit who was clicking on visuals in a report and just, maybe log that to a database somewhere. Whenever somebody clicks a visual in a report, it logs the user that clicked it.
I mean, theoretically, you could probably hook up the click action of the Power Automate button to a click of any chart, right?
I suppose you could.
Maybe you got to be careful though, because
sure,
all custom visuals are in a sandbox, so they don't really allow cross-site scripting. It's a very secure environment. There's like one or two exceptions, but with a custom visual, there might be a way.
Maybe we should create one. All right. Well, I think that's it for me. Jared, I'll pass it back to you then, I believe.
Yep. I'm going to a couple quick things here. Go ahead and let me share. Lost my video at some point here. Okay, so you see my screen again?
Yep.
All right, so I shared the Power BI April and May feature update URLs. I'm going to include, Sam, I think your items are mostly from the Business Application Summit recap, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let me share that one.
Yeah, there's definitely some cool ones in there. I'm definitely very interested in the new insights and governance functionality stuff that they had in there.
Yeah, definitely some other topics that'll come up in the not too distant future as I just scroll through these and remembering what they were. And then there's the other one I wanted to share is this link is the announcements from Microsoft Build, which was also very recently. Micro. And some pretty cool things in here that I encourage you to look through. This one is just particularly interesting, and I don't know how sophisticated it is and how helpful it'll be, but for those that are not fans of writing DAX, let me zoom in a little bit more. This gives you an option in the Power BI service to start typing a natural language question, kind of like you do now with Q&A, but then it actually gives you the DAX. So it seems like maybe it's not going to solve all the most complex DAX questions you have, but might be a good way to learn a little bit more about DAX. So that was kind of an interesting one. But there's a lot of other announcements in here that we'll definitely cover in coming meetings. So if anybody has any particular topics they're interested in, feel free to share. If anybody wants to present one of these topics, kind of like Sam did today, always looking to encourage people to do that. And then the one other thing I wanted to do was embarrass somebody quickly. James, you're still on, right? Okay, good. You're still here. So I did want to mention one of our own members, James Airy, was recognized as a kind of one of the 33 members worldwide to the Fast Track Recognized Solution Architect Power Platform ranking for 2021. And there we go, right here. James's little bio here. So quite a distinction. And I will mention that if anybody is interested, they are taking applications for the next fiscal year very soon. I think the link's live, but they haven't officially published it. So any questions about that, ask James. It was a rigorous interview process with the Power BI Cat team, and they talked to some of the projects you'd worked on, right, James?
Yeah, had a chat with one of the guys. The guy who actually does the what's it called? The bipolar BI blog.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I actually got to catch up with him, so it's a good time. But
Yep. And all right, anything else anybody wants to mention? I don't know, Hans, if I could put you on the spot, but I did want to mention too, in terms of international attendees today, Hans is joining us from Norway, right?
Yes, that's right. Hi all.
Hans is one of the original Power BI user group leaders, so quite a following on the Power BI user group front.
That's awesome.
All right. Well, I think that's everything we have in terms of presentation. If anybody has any other questions, let me throw these back up. Yeah, feel free to chime in now, or I think it was it I forgot who it was that had asked about Power BI overview, but I think she had to leave, so we'll catch her next time. But if you do know anybody who's new to Power BI and want like a Power BI overview, like the next meeting, what we could do, just let us know and we'll start like an hour early or half hour early, and we'll go through the entire Power BI overview slide, just so you get a sense of all the different features of the ecosystem. So all right. Again, always looking for volunteers, so feel free to reach out, and we'll probably see everybody in August, maybe September, depending on how motivated we are over the summer, and maybe what announcements we just can't wait to share. Inspires in July, so there might be cause. Who knows? We'll say.